All right, we're back to some brief overviews with things you would want to take for your notebook. We're going to discuss explaining criminal behavior. Now, the reason people study criminal behavior is if you can explain where this behavior comes from, hopefully you can eliminate the root cause and therefore eliminate crime. Obviously, that has not happened. So, no one cause is a universal cause for crime. And some of these causes I'm going to explain or actually have been debunked, but this is more of like throughout history, how has criminal behavior been explained? Now, we're not going to go through all of them, look at like the witch trials and things like that. But here's a few ideas. So, if you have a question, why do people commit crimes? These are the most major approaches that have been used more recently. The biological approach we're going to discuss a little bit. It's not used as much anymore. Um, a lot of it has racial undertones or maybe even overtones. But physiological and biomedical approaches, psychological approach, a geographical approach. So just a little bit on these differences. And like I said, we'll go over a biological approach a little bit. Geological approach, if you take AP human geography, we actually look at this, is that climate, topography, natural resources, your location actually affects who you are. A psychological approach is more about what motivates you. Do you have any personality deviations or disorders that could have been diagnosed? An ecological approach, it looks at the impact of spatial distribution of people and institutions. In other words, how close is a school to you? How close is a church? How crowded is the area you live in? Economic approach, that sort of common sense, money, resources, things like that. Social approach deals with things like education, religion, jobs, recreational activities. How does that influence you? A cultural approach looks at similar things, but also your social values that are influenced. Sociological is the effects of these values and attitudes. Conflict is just that you commit a crime as a result, as a consequence of a conflict that happened. And a multi-factor approach, which is probably most, given the most legitimacy, is that there's some sort of combination to these approaches. So make sure you understand what each approach means, whether you look it up or you rewind it to hear what I said, right? You want to know the difference between a geographical and an ecological, for example. Now let's discuss some of these biological theories. And once again, most of these theories are no longer considered legitimate for various reasons. The biological theories usually have the condition that criminals are born. You're sort of born a criminal. You're not made. You don't turn into a criminal because of, your social economic conditions or things like that. So there's a few people we'll talk about. Now, Cesare Lombroso, he was an Italian doctor who lived from 1835 to 1909. And he conducted observations and he actually measured the physical attributes of people. And he then sort of categorized people. And he said if people have certain pre-human traits, they're more likely to commit crimes. They have the stigmata of degeneration, he called it. In other words, if they had a slanting forehead, excessive dimensions of their jaw and their cheekbones, if their ears were of an unusual size, if their eyes seemed peculiar, if their teeth were abnormal, if their arms were excessively long, if their beard did not grow in fully, if their nose seemed twisted, if their hair was a certain way, or if their lips seemed swollen, or if they had tattoos. Now, you look around, lots of people have some of these characteristics. You may have some of these characteristics. That, of course, does not make you a criminal, all right? So take a deep breath. So you see there's a lot of, there's some racial biases for this and some other factors as well. Now, there's other biological theorists. We have people like Richard Dugdale. And in 1874, he traced 709 members of the Jukes family, Jukes, back to the year 1790. And he found that 20% of them were either like habitual thieves or prostitutes. And he said their criminality was because of their bad heredity, right? And this was just handed down biologically, generation to generation, right? Once again, we would probably look at other factors for that today. What other things do those families have in common? Not so much their genes, so to speak. In 1939, Harvard anthropologist Ernest Houghton, he published a book that should have been italicized here, Crime in the Man. And here he studied the measurements of the bodies of 14,000 prisoners in 10 states, plus some people who weren't criminals. And according to him, people who were criminals belonged to a class of biological degenerates, now isn't that harsh, who had a clear pattern of physical inferiority. Um, just the way they looked, their height, their weight. Basically, were they an endomorph, ectomorph, or mesomorph? And that helped classify them. If you knew someone's body type, you can, decide if they were going to potentially be a criminal or not. He thought, because of this, he thought of it as a science. If you find someone who was of the body type that was more determined to be a crime, you should be sterilized, meaning you cannot reproduce. You should be euthanized, which basically means you should be killed so you can't reproduce or commit crimes, or have the welfare provided to you if you are receiving any sort of welfare to be cut back. So once again, you see why we don't really put much stock in these biological theories today. We do give a little bit more credit to social cultural theories. And here, they look at society and culture. And the idea is that your place in society and into a social or cultural structure determines your tendency towards criminal behavior, right? And the socialization process of how you exist in a school circle, a family circle, your peer groups, how they influence or control, either encourage or discourage criminal behaviors. So the social disorganization theory links high crime rate to neighborhood characteristics. This was studied at the University of Chicago. And he said, the people that did this said that people, youths who lived in disadvantaged neighborhoods were participants in a subculture where delinquency was okay. Criminality was more normal. And so that would be a theory as to why they would continue to commit such behavior. The Anami theory stems from a French sociologist, Emily Durkheim. And they says there's social norms, but sometimes they have little impact. If you are frustrated, if you are angry, if you feel hopeless for living in one of these disadvantaged or disorganized communities, it's not the community itself, it's those feelings that will cause you to commit such a crime. This is similar to the general strain theory. And this theory says if you don't achieve certain positive goals, if the expectations and achievements of yours aren't matching up, if you have removal of positive achievements, maybe you were in, it could be something as simple as you were in a little league team and then that team was no longer existed because of cutbacks or something, that could cause a reaction, such other negative stimuli. And you have here in the box just a little overview of the strain theory. What are social and cultural process theories? They give this idea that criminality is a function of individual socialization, how you socialize with those around you, how you socialize with your family, with peers, with those in your school, with those that you work with in your place of employment. If relationships and if influences are dysfunctional, you may resort to criminal behavior as a way of attaining your goals. These theories suggest that all individuals, whether you're male or female, regardless of your race or ethnicity, regardless of your socioeconomic status, everyone has the potential to commit crimes. And as we see, people of all socioeconomic statuses, races, and genders commit crimes. So your social control theory is how closely are you attached to a community? It assumes that you are a rational being and you want to maximize your desire. You want to minimize your pain. So will your community sort of allow you to commit certain crimes because of your social bond? Is your social bond strong enough with teachers, with religious leaders, with parents, with your friends? That will help you know right from wrong, and see, are those bonds strong enough to not have you act out on things that may be criminal. Lastly, we have the criminal. I'm sorry. Damn it. I was recording. What happened?
Guess what I won?
What?
A whole $2.
You bought another lottery ticket.
She bought two. $3 and she made $2 in profit.
Okay, you can tell me all about it. Now I have to restart my video. Please drive safe.
But I won a whole $2. I spent $3 and won $5. Look at me go. I'm good.
All right, don't become an addict. I love you. Bye.
I should start gambling.
Don't start gambling. Bye.
I'm good at it though. I want $2.
George says be safe and save your money. Is this still recording? Let's hope. Um, oh boy, now where were we? The labeling theory now. This is one that, I've used even in education, saying, hey, don't label a student as a bad student because then they will fill into that role of thinking that they're a bad student. There are no bad students. You guys know I don't believe that there are. So if you guys have ever seen The Breakfast Club, this is a good example of labeling theory, right? The criminal commits not crimes, but he breaks the rules in schools because he feels that he's already labeled a criminal and he lives up to that identity. The jock thinks he has to do jock things, and the nerd does nerd things, so on. So if people start to think of themselves as a criminal because they are labeled as a criminal, that can make them continue to not just commit crimes, but to have a lifestyle where they consider themselves a criminal. All right. If you need to come back to this video, it will help you with the assignment coming up next.